Fans of the channel may remember our recent video about Cyberpunk Edgerunners and how we praised it for being a great video game adaptation. Well, it isn't the only great video game show on Netflix. That's right, this show is going to be all about the Castlevania series and what makes it great. So stick around, because there's a whole lot to love about this series. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering why we're covering Castlevania. After all, we're an anime channel, and this isn't actually an anime. Castlevania was produced in America and animated by Texas-based studio Powerhouse Animation. They've done some other adult animated shows for Netflix, such as The Blood of Zeus, and despite Castlevania being produced in the United States, we think that it still qualifies for our channel. Yes, it may be an American show, but it takes heavy inspiration from Japanese anime, similar to other American cartoons like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Ruby. In particular, Castlevania takes a lot of inspiration from the 80s dark fantasy anime and manga. Seriously, a lot of the monster designs in the show look like they'd be right at home in Berserk. It's sort of like how The Big O is an anime, but it's clearly more influenced by American cartoons, like Batman the Animated Series. So yeah, we think Castlevania belongs on the channel. Plus, it is an adaptation of a Japanese video game series. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into Netflix's Castlevania series and see what makes it so great. The head writer for Castlevania is Warren Ellis, who's mostly famous as a comic book writer. Comic fans may recognize some of his work, such as Planetary, Transmetropolitan, and Next Wave. Ellis does have some experience with anime before, believe it or not. He wrote the plot outlines for the 2011 Wolverine anime made in collaboration between Marvel and Japanese studio Madhouse. But enough of the background now. For those of you who aren't familiar with the series, you may be wondering what Castlevania is all about. Well, the Netflix series is an adaptation of the third Castlevania game titled Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse, although there are elements of a few later games such as Symphony of the Night included here. The plot begins when a woman named Lisa Tepes is executed for witchcraft by the church. But it turns out that Lisa Tepes wasn't just anybody. She was the wife of Dracula. And despite Lisa using her dying breaths to beg her husband to spare the humans, he doesn't listen. 1 year later, Dracula invades the country of Wallachia. But there are 3 people who can band together in order to stop Dracula. These are Trevor Belmont, the last member of the Belmont family, a family of disgraced monster hunters; Sypha Belnades, a mage and member of the Speakers, a nomadic clan that outsiders view with suspicion; and finally, Alucard, the son of Lisa Tepes and Dracula, looking to stop his father's reign of terror. Of course, there are many other characters in the cast, such as the other vampires serving under Dracula. Most characters receive a good amount of personality and backstory to them. Even characters who were meant to hate, like the bishop who executed Lisa, get a surprising amount of attention given to them. One of our favorite characters in the supporting cast is Godbrand, a Viking vampire who serves under Dracula. Of course, the main trio, as well as Dracula, really are the stars of the show. The central conflict is interesting as well, since on some level, Dracula's motives are understandable. The church killed his wife in cold blood, after all. Of course, Dracula's response to kill all humans makes him a bit less sympathetic and keeps you rooting for Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard. That said, of course, we're still given a lot of scenes starring Dracula and his various subordinates like Carmilla or his 2 human generals, Isaac and Hector. Even though these people are the villains, a lot of the time is spent fleshing all of them out. It's scenes like this that keep these people from being complete irredeemable monsters, even if they are on a quest to kill all humans. Funnily enough, the only villains who come off as irredeemably evil are the humans working for the church. And yeah, it is a bit accurate. In real life, the 15th century church used to be super corrupt. That's why Martin Luther nailed his whole complaint letter to the church door. But this is an anime channel, not a history channel, so we don't have time to talk about Castlevania's historical accuracy. Now, from everything we've shown you so far, you've probably been able to guess that Castlevania is a very, very dark show. I mean, one of the first scenes is a woman being burned alive. And then later in the episode, we get to see blood literally raining down from the sky. One advantage that Netflix gives this show is that it doesn't have to deal with any TV network standards, which means the violence can get pretty bloody and brutal. It's the reason that Edgerunners got away with so much violence too. It can get pretty extreme, maybe even a bit self-indulgent, so Castlevania is definitely not recommended if you are squeamish. For us, though, the violence in Castlevania is so over the top that it goes from being disturbing to actually being kinda cool. It's not just the violence either. Everything about the animation in the show is incredible. Usually when people think of American adult animation, people think of sitcoms like The Simpsons and Family Guy. And while those shows occasionally have well-animated sequences, Castlevania shows us that adult-targeted animated shows don't just have to be comedies. Action shows like this one can pull off some amazing scenes that even most live-action series can't. Major props to the animators who consistently delivered us amazingly animated scenes. Another interesting thing about Castlevania is the way that the story is told. Castlevania takes a bit of a decompressed approach to storytelling, meaning that things are taken slowly and given room to breathe. The first episode is literally just the backstory to the show, with Trevor Belmont only appearing at the very end of the episode. In fact, the whole first season is basically just one long prologue explaining how Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard first all met each other. This isn't a bad thing either. The slower pace lets us have more scenes where we get to know the characters in detail. But at the same time, the show knows just when to speed things up when we get into action sequences. Another thing we enjoy about Castlevania is the world building it gives us. Sure, it did have the original games to use as base, but experiencing a game and experiencing a TV show are two totally different things. This is where a lot of video game adaptations tend to struggle. The main appeal of most video games is that you are the main character, or at least you get to control them. So taking away the interactive aspect does sometimes take away part of its initial appeal. But in cases like Edgerunners and Castlevania, that is definitely not the case. They both find ways to keep the show entertaining without the interactivity. Edgerunners does this by just using the setting of Cyberpunk as a sort of basis for creating its own original story with new characters while still incorporating elements from the game and tabletop RPG. Meanwhile, Castlevania does this by expanding on what was already there to begin with. For example, Lisa's role is greatly expanded while still leaving her basic backstory intact. Yes, she does still die at the beginning, but we still learn a lot more about her before her death. Before we cap off this video, we'd like to share a piece of exciting news. Right now, a sequel series called Castlevania Nocturne is in the works. It's going to be an adaptation of the game Castlevania Rondo of Blood. It will take place in the late 1700s and focus on Trevor's descendant, Richter Belmont, with the backdrop of the French Revolution. Getting more Castlevania content should be exciting, and we definitely are going to be happy to see more. So overall, Castlevania has a lot to like. Entertaining characters, a compelling plot, incredible animation, and a dark atmosphere. It's not a surprise that it's getting a sequel. Netflix has a pretty spotty reputation when it comes to quality. Sometimes they can produce some pretty awful shows, but mostly their originals tend to be very high quality, especially in the animation department. In the past few years, Netflix exclusive anime have included Beastars, Comey Can't Communicate, Devilman, Crybaby, and of course, Cyberpunk Edgerunners. And we're more than happy to say that Castlevania is just as good as the rest of those shows. And of course, we're looking forward to seeing the further adventures of the Belmont family in Castlevania Nocturne.